And now that I'm actually a new New Englander, a Mainer, we moved there 4 years ago and really liked it. If someone had told me a dozen years ago that we were going to leave Washington, I wouldn't have believed it. But it was not hard seeing D.C. in the rearview mirror. So I visited it enough. But this is, two friends of mine that are really smart political analysts. Doug Sosnick's a Democrat, Bruce Mehlman's a Republican. And every time they start off with a presentation, they start off with this number. And that is that of the 13 national elections that we've had this century, starting in 2013, 11 out of 13, the House, the Senate, the presidency, or some combination have switched. 11 out of 13. And we've never had that kind of volatility before. And to me, the explanation of it, and then I can kind of fold it in 2024, is that everyone here, thousands of times you've heard, that the country as a whole is so evenly divided, two parties, basically the same size, narrowly divided in that while, there are a ton of people, actually Gallup came out over the weekend with their combination of all their surveys from last year, and something like 45% claim to be independent. And usually for elections, exit polls show it's generally more the mid-30s. But anyway, of those people that claim they're independent, as you all know, 3/4 of them vote reliably for the same party every time, so that they're kind of faux independents, And when you get right down to it, there's only like 5 or 6, about 10% really are independents, and half of them don't vote. And so we have these elections where it basically comes down to the last 4 or 5 percentage points, nationally, and in the 7 purple swing states. It comes down to just those. Yes, turnout for within the bases are important, but it comes down to those. And that it leads to just having an incredibly volatile situation. And that you look at 2024, and people will say is that it was sort of a horizontal loss, but not a vertical one, in that it was really broad-based. There's a Democratic data analysis firm that examined voter files in all over the country and found that of the 100 subgroups, 92 out of 100, the Democratic presidential vote went down. Share went down. 92 out of 100. It was 89% of every county in the country. It went down. So it was really broad, but the actual declines on the Democrat side, the 47, 48%, they don't move. They stay. They don't defect. They don't do anything. It's just this. But that little group, they're not very many of them. But when they go, it can be very, very decisive. And that's what basically happened in that election. And that, going back into the final days, and we're going to go to Q&A in just a second, but if you looked at the New York Times was doing averages of all the decent polls in the swing states. And 6 out of 7 of those states, one candidate was at 48% and the other was at 47%. Some of them had Harris up, some of them had, but 6 out of 7 had it was 47 or 48 for those two. And Arizona was the only state where Trump had a 3-point lead. It wasn't either 47 or 48. And when you count the votes, basically it was just that undecided in the middle, they all went one way. And so you could have a decisive outcome, decisive in the sense of all 7 swing states went the same direction, even though the movement really wasn't that great. And that you look down ballot, let's start off with the House of Representatives. Democrats had their hearts set on getting the House back last time. what was the outcome? They picked up 3 seats, but they needed 5. So there have been deaths and stuff in between. But the thing about it is, it was a disappointment for them that they didn't get what they needed to get a majority. But a gain is not a loss. A gain can be a disappointment, but a gain's not a loss. They gained there. Okay, then you look at the Senate, which is the most common example that people point. Well, Democrats had a net loss of 4 seats in the Senate, which is a tough loss, and they lost their majority. But when you think about it, though, 3 of those states, Montana, Ohio, West Virginia, God doesn't intend for Democrats to represent those states in the U.S. Senate. And why the hell anybody thought they might hold on to them? But just bit by bit by bit. And the other was Pennsylvania, which was a legit, that was a big, one of the 7 purple states. And when I do purple, I do, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Nevada, Arizona, Georgia, North Carolina. That was absolutely a legit. But when you look at those 7 of the 7 purple states, 5 of them had Senate races, and Democrats won 4 out of 5. Now, if an election is a disaster, if it's a debacle, you win 4 out of the 5 Senate races in the 7 purple states, or 5, well, there were only 5 that time. That's not what happens in a wipeout election. And it struck me as odd when I saw that, and I went back and looked, and in 2016, 18, well, since Donald Trump took the oath of office, there have been 21 U.S. Senate races in those 7 purple states. 21. And Democrats have won 17 out of 21. That's 81%. And then I looked at governor's races. Democrats had won 10 out of 14 governor's races during that, basically from the time Trump first took the oath of office through the 2024 election. But when you look down ballot, Republicans have done better in those purple states. And I was talking and I'm going to finish up and say, I was talking to a friend of mine, a Republican pollster, maybe a month before the 2024 election, and I asked him, what keeps you up at night? What do you worry about? And he said, and he's talking, this Republican's talking about his party, and he said, in the swing states, we're not getting the kind of candidates we used to get. Either the kind of candidates that can win in a purple swing state, they're either not running, or they're running and losing their primaries more often than not. So we're not getting the same kind of candidates that we used to. And to me, when you look around and you look at the last few elections, I think that is actually true. But for whatever reason, it's not applying, or whatever, not a salient, or whatever, something else is in there for down ballot. But at the top level, that if you're not kind of a MAGA, America First type, you're not going to win a Republican primary, in the places that matter. And I think that is, each of the parties have huge challenges. And for Republicans, it's going to be, well, I think for both parties, it's about candidate in swing states. It's like candidate constituency compatibility, let's call it, CCC. If you've got a purple state, and if you're a Democrat, you don't want to nominate a blue candidate in a purple state. If you're a Republican, you don't want to nominate a red candidate in a purple state. You want somebody that can reach swing voters, that can reach into that independent group of voters in the middle. And that while Democrats make that mistake from time to time, and who knows what's going to happen later this year, but at least of late, Republicans have been doing that more. And I think for coming up for this fall, I think the biggest variable in my mind is for each party, are they nominating the optimal candidates in the swing states or districts? Now, in a blue state, it almost doesn't matter who you nominate, you're going to win. Or in a red state, it doesn't matter who they nominate is going to win. But in the purple places, you've got to have one that can sync up. And is not, I'm trying to stop using the term wacko to describe candidates, so I've gone with exotic and potentially problematic. And for Republicans in 2022, last two votes, in 2022, you remember President Biden's approval rating was 40%, which was obviously not good. Normally, when you're in a midterm election and a president is unpopular, you're going to get your rear end handed to him. I mean, it's really likely. And it didn't happen in 22, and I think the reason it didn't happen was, and the conventional wisdom is, well, it was the Dobbs decision and a backlash against Republicans after on the abortion issue. Now, I'm pro-choice. I've always been pro-choice, as long as I've had an opinion. But when I look at it, that's not what it was about. Because when you look at the House vote nationally for the two sides, the Republican share went up in 2022 compared to the previous midterm election. The Democratic share went down. So this idea that you have this influx of pro-choice people coming to the polls and voting, and that's why Democrats didn't have such a nasty election, it clearly wasn't that. And you can look at basically 24 critical races, about 4 Senate, 4 governor, about 8 House, 4 AG, 4 Secretary of State, where there were really, really key races where if Republicans had nominated a potted plant, they'd have had a 50-50 chance of winning. But no, they nominated an exotic and problematic. And so to me, I think we know, my guess, I would be astonished if Republicans hold on to the House after this fall's election. I would be equally astonished, I'd even be more astonished if Democrats won the Senate. And, the House is a pretty good barometer of what's going on in the country. The Senate, not so much, because it depends on, which third of the Senate seats are up. Usually only about a half dozen are competitive. It really is more episodic. Just sort of more depends on lots of other things, including what happened 6 years earlier. So coming up this fall, I fully expect that Republicans are going to lose their majority in the House, but, the average since end of World War II, the party in the White House has lost seats in 90% of the midterm elections, and the reason, and it's actually, and the average is 26 seats. Now, we do have fewer competitive House races around the country now, a lot fewer, and with the mid-decade redistricting we've got right now, smaller than we had, a year and a half ago. And to me, that kind of locks off the top, but it doesn't change that you're probably going to see Republicans lose, maybe not 26 or above the average or above average, but to me, the probability of them losing in the 10, 15, 20 range is still just as high, and again, very, very likely. But, I close on this, on the Senate, the problem that Democrats have is that you've got 24 red states. I'm trying to think, wait, this is your left. Okay, you have 24 red states, red Republican states. Republicans have all 48 of the U.S. Senate seats from those 24 states. Over here, you've got 19 blue states. And Democrats have 18 out of 19, with Susan Collins in Maine, the only, the only Republican with the Senate seat in a blue seat. And then you have the 7 in the middle. Now this is where it gets kind of interesting. Remember I talked a couple minutes ago about how Democrats have disproportionately won more purple Senate races in purple states. You know, there are 7 purple states, which means there's 14 US Senate seats. Democrats have 10 out of 14. Now that's the problem, is they're down, they need a first seat in that game to get a majority, but there's only one, you've got Collins here, and then there's only one Republican seat that's in a purple state, and that's an open seat in North Carolina. So that even if you give Democrats, even if you assume they win Maine, and even if you assume they pick up the open Senate seat in North Carolina where Tom Tillis is retired, that gets them to 48, that gets them to 49. But getting to 51, Texas, Iowa, Ohio, Nebraska, give me a break. Because parties aren't taking states from the other parties' bases anymore. And Collins is the last outlier, and I'm doubtful whether she survives this, so that even if you have an election with a really good environment for Democrats, it's still not gonna, it's still not gonna turn a red state blue, in terms of the US Senate. And so I think the probability is very, very low, extremely low, of the Senate flipping. And to be honest, given these numbers and given that where things are, what Democrats have up, what Republicans have up, I'm a little doubtful that they can actually pull it off in 28. That you have to probably get maybe 2 more years down the road before you have a better chance of Democrats having a chance to win the Senate. And so it's, while Republicans have problems in purple states, the problem that Democrats have is there are too many red states. You have 24 red states, 48 Senate seats. That's, you're almost at a majority right there. So anyway, Jim, let me turn it back to you, and then we'll go whichever way we...
Well, thank you for answering all our questions. Hope everybody has a great day. When you just mentioned about the Senate, the seat that I'd be worried about if I was a Democrat is Michigan, because that's an open seat, and you have one candidate in the Republican side, Mike Rogers, who's a very strong candidate.
Who is not exotic or problematic.
Yeah, and the Democrats are a very contested primary. That seat could flip Republican.
Yeah, I agree completely. And one of the things that happened, Rogers was the Republican nominee for the Senate in 24. But the thing that he had going against him is Michigan has their primaries in August. Now, first of all, why the hell would anybody put a primary in August? But anyway, it was a hotly contested primary, and so he didn't become the nominee till August, and was not able to leverage that into the kind of money to really be competitive in the general election. And so his losing, it wasn't because he was a lousy candidate or anything, but this time he's consolidated the party, and it's not going to have a contested primary. I don't know if anybody here, well, I'd love to talk afterwards with anybody who really knows a whole lot about New Hampshire politics, because it is sort of the thing that sticks out. Of all the 19 blue states, and keep in mind the red, blue, purple, all that is sort of based on presidential voting. But of those 19, it's one of the only 3, I guess, with a Republican governor. It is the only of the 19 blue states, it's the only one that's got Republican state House and a Republican state Senate. And in fact, 5 times in a row they've elected a Republican governor. So that if you were going to say, look at the 7 swing states that people usually say are purple, if you were going to say which one may not really be purple, I might nominate North Carolina because it's the only one that Trump's carried all 3 times, not by a lot, but he's won all 3. And if you were going to add one to the mix, I think it might be New Hampshire, where I think it looks more purple. But the question in my mind is why does New Hampshire behave so differently than every other state that's theoretically blue? And in Vermont, I mean, yeah, they've been elected. Scott's been governor for a good while. Actually, for a while, a year or 2 ago, I guess 2 years ago, the 3 most popular governors in the country were Republicans from New England.
Yeah.
And
Charlie Baker.
Yeah. And the thing is, and to me the key goes back to what I was talking about a minute ago about compatibility, is that Republicans in New England, not across the board, but more often than not, they are not nominating ruby red candidates in some of these places, and as a result, they're able to sort of defy gravity a good bit better than Republicans in some of these other states. I mean, that's at least the theory I have. I don't know, maybe there's something else.
The president is spending an awful lot of time in international affairs, Venezuela, Colombia, Cuba, Ukraine. If you were a Republican member of the House running for re-election, would you be urging the president to be spending as much time as he is on international issues? Or would you say the White House should be focused on affordability, because I won't be re-elected if he keeps talking about the ballroom and the international affair issues?
The smart aleck in me would say, why say anything? Because he wouldn't care what I thought. I mean, he doesn't really care what Republican senators think. He's sure as hell not going to care about what a Republican House member thinks. But, they either survive or they don't survive. But if you want to catalog all the things that President Trump is doing, all the things that are problematic, it's a really long list. And spending a whole lot of emphasis on international affairs and things that would certainly look different from America First. That's one, but gosh, there's so many other ones that,
So how important is international affairs when you poll with constituents?
I don't, this sounds, and let me, before I get somebody mad at me, let me put a caveat in here. We have a son who was a combat veteran from Afghanistan. And so, I feel real strongly. So I want to do that to inoculate myself for what I'm going to say next. In terms of international affairs, if American servicemen and servicewomen, if you see a lot of bodies coming back to Dover, that gets them excited. But in the absence of that, I don't think it matters. I really don't. Now, a lot of times what happens internationally can affect domestic, or can affect the U.S. economy and domestic, and that's what does matter. But, you could feel like, what the hell, why are we doing this in Venezuela? It's not even where fentanyl comes from, which is where the drug that's the problem, the biggest problem for us. But the thing about it is, theoretically that could be a problem, but there's so many other ones that, hard for me to say that's going to be the big one.
The president met with the Republican congressional committee last week, and one of his messages was, we need to keep the House, because if we don't keep the House, the other side is going to impeach me. And do you think that the Democrats should be very, very careful in using that term? Because that, some people on the other side say that's going to rally the Trump voter who may not have voted in the past, an off-year election, to get out and vote. Because do you hear what the Democrats are now going to be doing? The first thing they're going to do is to have the hearings, have the impeachment hearings, and then maybe have a vote on it.
I think President Trump talking about impeachment may be the only advice he gets from his political office that he actually listens to and acts on. They see that as a motivator. I have a very, very dear friend, like you, Governor, who is a former U.S. attorney. He was Nixon U.S. attorney, Reagan appointed federal judge, lifelong Republican, extremely Republican. And during the two Trump impeachment fights, or particularly the first, we had this ongoing debate and fun. The lifelong Republican was in favor of impeaching President Trump. And I was against it for the simple fact is it's not going to work. You're not going to get a conviction. What's the point if you're not going to get one? Now, if I were Democrats, I think they're insane to talk about impeachment. Now, having said that, are there plenty of insane Democrats in Congress? Hell yeah. But to me, that just agitates, why do something that agitates the base on the other side? But even if he is impeached, he's not going to be convicted. Now, to me, the real danger for Trump is the subpoena power, the power to have hearings. That's what he ought, that's the real threat, but that doesn't motivate the base nearly like impeachment does. So impeachment's the button to push politically for President Trump, and that's, as I said, that may be one of the only pieces of advice he's taking from him.
We have 3 Senate races here in New England. We have Maine, we have New Hampshire, we have Massachusetts. You live in Maine. You talk about the primary there because it seems to be a little closer than people thought with Graham Planter, the outsider who all of a sudden seems to be getting a great deal of support in the progressive liberal area of Maine. And then you have Janet Mills who is the governor, and people thought that she'd be the easy Democratic nominee for the Senate. Your thoughts on how that race is playing out?
Well, just sort of chronologically, I could see where Governor Mills probably, first of all, I don't think she's ever had an abiding interest to be a U.S. Senator. And I don't think she's been dying. I know she did run for the House way back, but I don't think it's been a top priority thing to move to Washington, in the recent past. And I think the reason she's in this race, the sole reason, is because of President Trump, and that while she likes Senator Collins a great deal, but that, is upset that Collins isn't handling things differently. I think from Mills's standpoint, she wanted to, she has total name recognition, as does Collins. So what would be the point of getting in a Senate race a year and a half out if it just makes it more expensive? It makes a horrible experience longer. And so I think she just thought she could wait till, October, November and jump in and no problem. And she didn't anticipate, her people didn't anticipate, and quite frankly, I don't know who did, that somebody would come in and jump in like Graham Plattner has and get the stir he's raised within the Democratic base and become, something of a problem for her. And it's I don't know why he's running for U.S. Senate, because he could have run for some county level office or state house or state. You've never done anything pointed towards politics ever before. Why didn't you stop there? Why didn't you just run for president? I mean, you know, it makes just as much sense, right? But he did, and I look at him and have, you know, questions about whether his judgment and all kinds of things like that. But the thing is that I do give his campaign, I do give his campaign really high marks, because they've done more with less than I've seen a campaign do in a long, long, long time. Even to the point of, who's into betting markets? What's the one, not the Kalishi or whatever? Yeah, basically, these things, I mean, I understand the law of big numbers and all that, but they're so lightly traded that you get your per candidate to be a favorite in the betting markets, and then you leverage it into a news story, which is probably one of the cheapest stories they've done. You know, I mean, but they just sort of leave no stone unturned. So I don't think there's really much of a doubt that Mills wins the nomination. But this is chewing up time, money, attention, effort, maybe pulling her more over to the left than she probably needs to be. But you know, I think a lot of, you know, we used to have lots and lots of moderate, you know, liberal Republicans, moderate Republicans. You know, what was the old term? Gypsy moth Republicans. I was a Democrat from the South, so it was blue. You know, it was a boll weevil way back. But used to have lots of those, but one by one, that's just to be a conservative Democrat or a liberal Republican in this era right now, as polarized as we are, as parliamentary as our politics have become, and then given where President Trump is and where, you know, the Northeast tends to be, I mean, she's like the survivor of that group, but I think having a really weak opponent last time who ran a terrible campaign had as much to do with the outcome then as anything else. And I think I think she's trying to do something that didn't used to be that hard, being a moderate Republican, or being a moderate Republican when you have a Republican president. But it's now gotten to the point where it's damn near impossible, just as it is for, you know, moderate to conservative Democrats to survive, you know, in the South, let's say. That's just become a no man, no woman's land. I mean, it's just hard to be there. But so I think it would be very hard if Plattner were to win the Democratic nomination. I think it'd be close to a 50-50 race. If Mills is the nominee, I think, I mean, it's not a deeply blue state, but it certainly is more blue than not. I think it'd be, in the age of Trump, I mean, Senator Connolly would be a hell of a lot better off if there were a president, you know, someone like a Bill Weld, a Republican, you know, someone like that from that part of the party. That wouldn't be a problem for her. But this is really, really challenging.
Two other races quickly. In New Hampshire, you have Chris Pappas, who will be the Democratic nominee for the Senate, but then you have a contested Republican primary with Scott Brown and John E. Sununu. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that's, you know, Michigan is your sleeper race. I'm kind of torn between Michigan and New Hampshire. I think New Hampshire is probably the Senate seat that Democrats ought to be worried about a lot more than they are, because you have a state where Republicans have won the governorship now 2-year terms, but what, 5 times in a row. They've won majorities in the House and the Senate. that's a pretty scary, I mean, that looks pretty swingy to me, and that John, I get all the initials, Peeps, and you know, he's not Trumpy, and so if something stays Pappas, it might be that, you know, it's not likely to be a down year for Democrats, you know, but I think that's going to be a very, I think a very, 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 very close race. I wouldn't.
How about the Commonwealth of Massachusetts? Ed Markey, the incumbent, being challenged by Zeb Moulton.
I don't know. I'm not going to presume to tell people from Massachusetts something about Massachusetts politics. I don't know.
Right.
I mean, and if I did know, I wouldn't say. but I want to emphasize, I don't begin to understand the inner workings of the Massachusetts Democratic Party.
Well, just going forward quickly, at 28, is J.D. Vance the nominee on the Republican side?
If you go back, you know, post-World War II history, no, every sitting vice president who has sought their party's nomination has won that nomination. I mean, start from Nixon in 1960 on. It's like, what, I guess it's 5-0. Now that's a pretty strong pattern. And while, you know, if it's not Vance, I guess it'd probably be Rubio, but I think that it will be hard for any Republican to stop Vance unless in some way he offends President Trump, and then it would be all bets are off. Now, but here's a good trivia question. Who was the last sitting vice president to seek their party's presidential nomination and not win it?
Joe Ford.
No, sitting vice president seek it.
Joe Biden.
Nixon.
You're not going to get it. Because I didn't get it. 1940, John Nance Garner was FDR's vice president, and not quite as progressive or liberal as the president is. Ran against Roosevelt for the Democratic nomination, obviously lost. So it's kind of a trick question, actually. I mean, but it's like, wow. But he was the former Speaker of the House from Texas. And he's the one that coined the phrase that the vice presidency was not only worth a butt in war. Now, whether he actually said spit or something else, I don't know. But but I think it would be hard to stop him for the nomination. I really would. I really do.
And Democratic side, people are all talking about governors. Do you think it's going to be a governor that to watch to be the nominee?
I think I've gotten through this without offending too many people here. So let me go ahead and give it a shot. If I were Democrats, I would have two criteria for the nomination. One, I would want no one who served in the cabinet or any close association with President Biden's administration. And number two, I wouldn't nominate anybody from Massachusetts, New York, or California. Just because you get pulled into pretty exotic places to get elected in those kinds of states, in states that are not, you know, things that are not terribly helpful in terms of winning swing states. And I think they would do better to look elsewhere, but they're not likely to ask me for advice. But I mean, just think about how Kamala Harris got tripped up on the transgender health ad that I mean, where she got pulled to a place that in a Democratic primary, in a Democratic nomination context, whether it was state or federal, doesn't matter, a place that was really kind of hard to explain in swing states. And since I perhaps haven't alienated everybody, I think I read Vice President Harris's book, and don't get me wrong, if I were Biden, I would never have picked her, okay? I just wouldn't have. But I read her book, and 107 days, he said, if she'd had any longer, she'd have won. And I thought, no, I think that's wrong. Because I think she was screwed from the get-go, and it had nothing to do with her. That, to me, when President Biden's approval rating dropped 14 points in 4 months back in 2021, his first year in office, and never got above 46% again, I think in terms of re-election, I think he was a goner from that day on, and that anybody who was his vice president, and I don't care if they were white or black or male or female or gay or straight, I don't think anybody that was sitting vice president was likely to win that race. I think it was just it was kind of done. And so I don't think more time would have helped her, and I don't really, she actually was a better candidate than I thought she'd be, but still, that's not what that election, I think, was really about. And I think going back to the start, when I talk about each side's got about 47, 48% locked up, and it's just a race of that 4% in the middle. To me, a party ought to, if you're a Republican, you ought to aim for the 40-yard line on the right side, and if you're a Democrat, you ought to aim for the 40-yard line on the left side. And you get in and occupy that space and not be a complete screw-up, and it'll be hard to take it away from you. But I think people, and I think President Trump is guilty of this. You think 2020, I think, and I've always liked Joe Biden a great deal, but 2020, I think, wasn't about him at all. I think it was about President Trump. And 2024, I don't think it was about Trump. I think it was about Biden or Biden-Harris. And that when you see all these voter groups that moved a couple points over, to me, it wasn't these groups becoming more Republican, it's they were pissed off about the cost of living, and they were going to punish the administration that saw, inflation go to 40-year high. And that, I think when they got in there, I think important to know for if someone wins is to know why you won. And not assume that it was because people just love you and every thought you ever had. They may have just been, or more likely be mad at the other side. In fact, I would argue that those people in the middle, in the real middle, I don't think they generally vote for anybody. They vote against. And they look to punish. And I think that's sort of what happened there, and why you're going to see some of these groups that did gravitate over, did move from Biden 20 to Trump 24, whether they go all the way back over here or not, I don't know, but I think that was really more situational to 2024. But but I think, part of the problem is that our parties have become so, you used to have this great overlap between the two parties, and you'd have, moderate Republicans, you'd have conservative, Ed King, by my standards, I would say he was fairly conservative. You used to see that all over. I mean, when I was in college and working in the Senate, my boss was a conservative Democrat from Louisiana, Bennett Johnston. The two senators that I jump out my memory that had the offices, the suite of offices on the Russell Building on the fourth floor across the street, across the hall from us, were both senators that my boss voted against, like almost entirely. And the first was Ed Brooke, and the second was Ted Kennedy. You know, but you had these things happening in those days, and just don't well, in 1955, the American Political Science Association, they had some kind of a task force or something. They issued a report that was very critical of the two parties, saying that they were not ideologically coherent. I guess it was untidy for there to be conservative Democrats or liberal Republicans, and that you should have starker choices. And what they thought was a weakness, and I think that's actually what made us the most stable democracy in the world. And that when we no longer had two ideologically and geographically diverse states, one center right, one center left, and when that went away, that's where you lost the stability. And so now it's just swinging back and forth, and that 11 out of 13 changes in party control, 11 out of 13 elections, that's what happens. And it's hard to govern, and for those in the business community, how do you do long-term planning if national policy is going to change 180 degrees every 4 years? You know, I mean, and you think about the transitions that we've had over the years from Eisenhower to Kennedy, from LBJ to Nixon, from Ford to Carter, from Carter to kind of go down Obama, Trump, Bush is all. They were transitions, but nothing. But you go Obama to Trump, and then Trump to Biden, and then Biden back. I mean, transition isn't even a word for it.
Why don't we open it up, one or two questions, and then we'll end the program. So, the Honorable.
Charlie, notwithstanding the historical precedent of midterm victories for the minority parties, for the swing states, do you think 26 is going to be about, from a voter standpoint, from the swing voter standpoint, anti-Trump? Is it going to be about current economic conditions? Or is it going to be about quality of the candidate itself?
I think I kind of tipped my hand a minute ago, but I would say quality is one term, candidate quality, and that goes to part of what my friend was talking about, where, are you getting the best possible candidate in terms of somebody who's smart and someone who is articulate and can, there's skills, and then are they compatible, a purplish candidate for a purplish state? And I think that's actually, you look at, whether it's the North Carolina Senate race or the Michigan or wherever. I think for these swing races, it's going to be about the candidate in terms of quality and compatibility with the constituency. That's going to be number one. And then number two would be what do people in that state, what or who pisses them off the most? And that's and that's going to be a close call. I mean, you know, where are the big U.S. Senate races, aside from Maine? And I would say, you know, New Hampshire, North Carolina, Michigan, Georgia. Yeah, Georgia, I'm sorry, yeah, I left out Georgia. And I think that for the good news for Democrats, well, the bad news is that the public turned on Democrats real, on the presidential level, real hard in 24, but not so hard down ballot. Oh, I didn't finish. I started off on that. I got the House and the Senate, but governors, no net change in governorships, no net change in secretaries of state in 24. Republicans had a net gain of 1 attorney general post, but you look below the Senate, and it was a kind of nothing burger election. You know, no clear direction, move in any direction. And then the Senate, you know, I would argue the net loss of 1, because the, you know, red states voting red, to me, that's not exactly man bites dog. And but I think Democrats have done, I think Trump has managed to put Biden and the Biden administration pretty far back in the rearview mirror. And whether it's economy or whatever, he pretty much owns it now. You know, the period where you can blame Biden, whether you think he deserved it or not, that's kind of over. So I think Canada would be the top thing, and Canada quality compatibility. I think in the purple places, that's what will make the biggest difference, because they're evenly split places. You know, with the exception of Maine, which is a little bit, a little bit more Democrat, which just makes it a little bit harder for Senator Collins.
Is there a hand up? Yeah.
So I'm from New Hampshire. So my question to you is, how do the tectonic plates move in these parties? I mean, I moved to New Hampshire and Mel Thompson was the governor. So the notion that New Hampshire is a bluish state when I first moved there obviously was not. It was a very conservative state. Over the course of our lifetimes, we have seen these tectonic plates move. The South used to be, you know, Democratic. It's now solidly Republican. How do those tectonic plates move? How do parties take advantage and change that dynamic and try to get the movement toward their position?
You know, I mean, I like, and I've used before, the tectonic plate thing. New Hampshire, it's something I'm seeking to understand. Now, somewhere in my bookcase, you've got, what is that book? Who the Hell is William Loeb, or whatever that book came out? One of my goals in the next year or two is to better understand New Hampshire. But I think having 2-year terms for governor makes that place very responsive. Very, very, very responsive. But and over the years, we've seen House seats flipping back and forth in New Hampshire as often as any place in the country. And so, to me, I'm not sure I would put New Hampshire in the tectonic plate as much as just and again, I can't speak to what was going on 30 or 40 years ago in New Hampshire, but I do think that it's one of the more interesting places that it's kind of harder to explain. I mean, I was thinking my home state of Louisiana, until a few years ago, we had, for 8 years, we had a Democratic governor. Now, I didn't think we were ever going to have a Democratic governor again in Louisiana. But it required 3 things to line up. You had to have a horrible governor, and I think Bobby Jindal was one of the worst governors the state of Louisiana ever had, which is ironic because I had urged my parents to vote for him the first time. But anyway, followed by a very, very weak Republican nominee. It was Senator David Vitter, who was not helped by being on the D.C. Madams list at the time. And then you had a Democratic nominee who was a pro-life, pro-gun, former president of the Honor Council at West Point, 82nd Airborne, conservative Democratic legislator. I mean, he was like a unicorn, you know? I mean, I wouldn't have thought there was one of those around, you know? But it took all three. Or Kansas, you know, where Governor Kelly, you know, I think she's termed out this time, and, you know, it may be a long time before Democrats ever see a governor of Kansas. But we're on the, in terms of red states, it requires the confluence of weird factors for a Democrat to win. But Governor Weldon and I were talking before, in New England, sort of the Phil Scott, the New Hampshire, the Massachusetts, Maryland, from time to time, they just elect Republican governors. I mean, with more regularity than any other blue states around. And to me, it's just a quirky thing. And I don't understand it. And that's one of my goals the next year or two is to understand New Hampshire. But you know, the whole thing about national tectonic plates, you know, of course that's, you know, huge, but I don't think that explains New Hampshire.
One final question, and if you have any other questions, you can see Charlie afterwards.
Do you think that Bobby Kennedy will make a run against J.D. Vance?
Do I think Bobby Kennedy will take a run against J.D. Vance? I don't know. Not sure I care, but no, I don't. You know, I mean, I just, you know, to me, who the hell knows what he's going to do any given day, or you know, whatever. So I don't. I mean, I'm sorry for being flippant, but you know, you could have missed his presidential candidacy last time, you know, fairly easily. So I don't. But you know, I think what your question sort of triggered something though in my mind was that I do think that in 2024 you did have a slice of voters that were pretty upset with Biden-Harris, but this is not the cruise they signed up for. And yeah, you may have heard something here or there about vaccines, or you may have heard about but it was really what you know, if demolishing the East Wing of the White House was in the dialogue in 2024, I missed it. Or, you know, renaming the Kennedy Center, or, you know, the vaccine stuff, it was mentioned, but, you know, I don't think it moved any real votes anywhere. But, you know, I do think that when you get elected to a high-level executive office, there should be some connection between how you won and how you govern after that. And you know, I think after each election, whether party wins or loses, if you won, you ought to have a pretty clear-eyed understanding of why you won. And if you lost, a fairly clear-eyed view of why you lost. And that's where I think Democrats are off mark this time, because I don't think they kind of realize why they don't want to think about why they actually lost. You know, which is one good reason for ditching the autopsy, is never ask a question if you don't already know the answer. Or if you do, I mean, or you don't like the answer that it would come up with, although I don't think. So, I don't know. I told Governor Weld, I've been a registered independent since the early 80s, which, you know, you kind of need to be to do what I do anyway, but it's kind of one of the reasons why I started doing what I do. But I think it's odd that I've been a registered independent for 40-something years, and I've never voted for an independent. Because I've never saw one that I thought was worth voting for. I mean, I'd welcome with open arms. Now, the presidential, obviously, with the electoral college, really, that doesn't work, but anyway. Awesome.
Well, with that, we just want to thank Charlie again for being here and being so enlightening, informative session, to say the least. But before we end, I'm going to ask, first of all, I want to thank Tom Kershaw again, opening up his home to the New England Council, as he does so frequently. I want to thank him. But Mark Kerwin is here, and a member of the New England Council would like to make a presentation to you, Charlie.
We're gonna make a culture maven out of you yet.
Oh, I thought you were gonna give a presentation.
Rachel Winslow home today, and Ethan signed.
My wife her train should be coming in shortly. That was kind of, she desperately wanted to do, and I was able to score a Christmas present by coming up with the tickets. Thank you, Mark. Thank you very much.